Aegon Targaryen is the best character of Season 2, and you cannot tell me otherwise. Now, I've already kind of expressed how I feel that the writers of Hot D have really failed some of the characters this season in a video I made last week where I talk about how they failed the character of Alicent Hightower in comparison to what was shown to us about her character in Season 1. However, unlike Alicent and some of the other characters in the story, I think Aegon is one of the characters they actually did pretty well in the new season. And I find that kind of funny because this was probably unintentional on their end. But regardless, though I have my gripes with Season 2, I do want to make it clear that I do not hate the season. There are good things about it, more so towards the earlier episodes, 1 to 4, and I do believe that Aegon is one of those good things about Season 2. One of the consistently good things, in my opinion. I know saying that Aegon is the best character in Season 2 is definitely gonna be a controversial take for some people who view this video. And before I get people in my comment section calling me a closeted green, despite the fact that I've said in numerous videos I support neither side, among other things like a misogynist and an incel, which people have also called me every time I've talked about the Greens in a positive light, I just want to say, just because someone likes or enjoys a character does not tend to speak to them as a person and does not mean that they condone some of their actions on screen. I am well aware that Aegon is a sex offender in the show. I am well aware he is not a good person. But that does not mean a bad person cannot be a good character to watch on screen. Take Joffrey from Game of Thrones, for example. Joffrey is the scum of the earth. He is sadistic, he enjoys torturing and abusing people, he enjoys killing people, and doing whatever he wants without consequence, no matter who gets hurt. But despite being so horrible, Joffrey is still a good character. Joffrey is evil, but he leaves an impression on you that gets you invested in the story. It gets you invested in his story and where it will end. Will he live? Will he die? You hope he dies, but if you haven't seen the show through, you don't know. But you're invested enough in his character to stick around and find out. He evokes emotion, and you may not like him, but once again, he makes you care what happens to him. And this is pretty much how I feel about Aegon II. But I will say that those feelings and the character itself are a bit more complicated than Joffrey Baratheon. But before we get into that, if you guys like what I have to say today, feel free to drop a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos. Now, let's get into it. So, no doubt, a part of the reason that I feel a bit more compelled by Aegon this season as opposed to Season 1 is definitely because of the phenomenal acting delivered by Tom Glencarney, the actor for Aegon, if you don't know his name. Now that he's actually been given the time and space to shine, he really sells the character of Aegon. The grief, the rage, the desire to be loved and accepted by those around him. He does the progression of the character justice, even if we really only get to experience it in its full glory for 4 episodes. And once again, this is where I do give props to the showrunners because I think they handled this well. They did a good job expanding on what we know about Aegon as a character, while also unveiling new and different layers of him, but they do it in a way that doesn't feel like it strays from the character, betrays the portrayal of him, it makes them feel inconsistent, like Alicent Hightower. But if you want my thoughts on how I feel about the direction they took her character, go watch my other video about her. Now, a part of the reason outside of Tom's acting that I think they did well when it comes to Aegon's character is that Aegon was pretty much a blank slate to begin with in Season 1. And admittedly, I think this was one of the issues in the first season that they did recover from in the second. Aegon wasn't much of a character, to be honest. He didn't have any scenes or interactions with his sister Rhaenyra, which is weird since they're siblings and this whole war is about which one of them gets to sit on the pointy metal chair. Aegon didn't even truly feel like opposition, to be honest. And I suppose that makes sense. Aegon was never written as a very ambitious character in Season 1, and this was pretty much the same case around this point in the books as well. But despite the lack of ambition, he's definitely built up to be evil, or at least unfavorable in comparison to Rhaenyra. From a young age, Aegon is shown to be indecent and unlikable. He bullies his little brother, he leers at the serving women, he insults his sister and calls her an idiot because he doesn't want to marry her, and he's a drunk at the age of 15. So this kid really doesn't seem to have much going for him, and it only gets worse when he's older. Aegon is aimless with no regard for his duties as a prince, whatever those may be. He's still a drunk, he's unfaithful to his wife, sleeps around, fathers numerous bastards that he doesn't seem to care about, watches them fight in fighting pits, and if that wasn't bad enough, to top it all off, he's a sex offender. which in the majority of media, when it comes down to the general audience, is seen as worse than murder, which happens a lot in House of the Dragon. Sexual violence is usually the point of no return. Aegon being a cheater and slacker are things that the audience could have gotten past and even forgiven. I mean, look at Robert Baratheon and all of the stuff he does in Game of Thrones. He drives the kingdom into debt, never even tried with his relationship with Cersei, who did express some level of interest and love in him at one point, and even physically gets abusive with her. Now, granted, there is more to that relationship, and Cersei isn't exactly the greatest person either, but by adding the specific element to Aegon's character, it's very clear in Season 1 they do not want you to root for him. So, why do I feel like Aegon is the best character in Season 2? Why has he become strangely likable to a lot of viewers despite the fact that he was so terrible in Season 1? I already kind of talked about this in the past with a video called Aegon, A Man Without Love. It was one of my very first videos ever uploaded here on the channel. And in that video, which I recommend you check out, I talk about how despite how terrible Aegon is presented within Season 1, he struck me as more of a tragedy than anything else. Aegon Targaryen, for all his antics and villainy in Season 1, is also a victim. In some ways, I see Aegon as an inversion of Rhaenyra, and I don't think that's too far-fetched to say since there are a lot of similarities and comparisons to be made about the characters in Season 2, but when I say Aegon is an inversion of Rhaenyra, I think he's definitely an example of how patriarchy doesn't only affect the women, but it can also affect the men. And in Aegon's case, it also affects how he develops as an individual. He shows that other side of the coin. Despite men benefiting the most from a patriarchy like Westeros, they can also suffer because of it. Aegon, being male, should have given him the most advantages in a society like this. And more often than not, we do see him indulge in those advantages and freedoms. But even with that being said and known, that doesn't mean that Aegon just has an easy, perfect life. Aegon goes through a lot of physical, verbal, and emotional abuse at the hands of his mother as she projects her own fears and paranoia onto her son. He's pushed to be something he never wanted to be, king, because of his grandfather's ambitions, his mother's paranoia, and all because he was his father's firstborn son. Because this is the tradition and precedent set by Westeros for generations in favor of male inheritance. Because he is a son, Aegon has a lot of expectations placed on him pretty much from the moment he is born. And his story is a great example of how people can buckle under the pressure, and how costly the weight of expectations can really be. Aegon is rarely praised for anything. You can go back to Season 1 and see how pretty much all the time Aegon is told how he's doing something wrong, how he can do better. He gets slapped around for almost everything. For not viewing his sister as a threat, for not protecting his little brother when he lost an eye, even though he had no way of knowing that Aemon planned to sneak out to claim a dragon and would get into a fight. He was slapped because of his situation with Diana, which was justified. I'm not saying it wasn't, but the point is, abuse is very common with this character. And so is neglect. If we're going to be completely honest, Viserys was a terrible father. He spent more time with his Legos than he did with his own children. Viserys didn't love Aegon the same way he loved Rhaenyra, probably because he didn't even want Aegon. He says himself he never really imagined that he would remarry. He only married Alicent out of comfort, to be honest, and he sired more children strictly for the purpose of lengthening the family line. So, despite being the firstborn son, Aegon is the second choice, the backup plan. So with the views of society forced upon him, the idea that as the firstborn son, he has to be king, he has to be excellent, he has to be great and perfect, and having lacking parents, some of which who are neglectful, it is no wonder he turns out the way that he does. I mean, I don't think Aegon really had a chance even with his favorable circumstances, like being born into the upper echelon of this society. The point of all of this is to say, there are layers to him outside of being Rhaenyra's spoiled, sadistic little brother. And this is one of those things I think Season 2 gets right, going past the monster that they portrayed him as and showing the man beneath. I know a few people, when Season 2 was airing, just expected Aegon to kind of be like Joffrey 2.0, but if I'm being honest, Aegon and Joffrey shouldn't even be mentioned in the same sentence. Joffrey was a character who was coddled and spoiled, cruel just for the sake of it, made to believe that he could do anything and everything right. While Aegon was neglected, abused, and while he has himself been cruel, he reads as more of a reflection of the things that were done to him, the pain that was given to him by his family that he gives back to the world. Unlike Joffrey, Aegon wasn't made to believe that he could do no wrong. All he was told was how he was lacking, how he needed to be better, how he needed to be grateful. Yet, despite that in Season 2, Aegon displays the capacity to be more than what he was presented as. He has the capacity to be kind and caring. He wants to do right by the people around him who did right by him, like the common folk, especially the common folk, because they accepted Aegon when pretty much no one did for his entire life. They gave him the unconditional love he never got from his mother and father. Aegon also loves his son Jaehaerys, and outside of his moments with Sunfire, he seems to be the happiest when he's with his son. He's proud of him just for existing and being around, even if he is a disruption for important matters at court. It's such a contrast to his relationship with his own father, and probably why he's so lenient and loving. He relishes the opportunity to be what he never had as a child. So it makes it all the more painful and gets you that much more invested in the character when his son dies in such a brutal way. The descent into grief and madness is so compelling, and there are even layers to Aegon's rage in the aftermath of it all. On the one hand, he's angry he was attacked in his own home. The king is supposed to be all-powerful, yet his family wasn't protected. A devastating blow was dealt to his image and his legacy as a ruler with the death of his son, as now he has no heir. Now he looks weak, because this was able to happen within his own walls. On the other hand, it's a father who's furious at the death of his child, perhaps his own failure to protect him. The opportunity to be what he never really had from any of his family is just ripped away from him in an instant. Then before we can even grieve the sudden loss of his child, his death is used as propaganda to slander his sister. And to present strength as the king, he isn't even allowed to attend his own son's funeral. He's left to stew in his emotions, and eventually he lashes out, killing all the rat catchers in the city for the sake of killing the one man who killed his son. It's rash, impulsive, and cruel to the people, and he doesn't even know if he got the right guy at the end of it all. But I feel like this is a very complex moment for the character, because it showcases his cruelty, but it also showcases his love in a way. Now, that sounds odd, but let me explain. On the one hand, this is the tyranny of a king, killing hundreds for the sake of one, trying to send a message to the people. But on the other hand, it's a father lashing out in grief, in anger as he tries to get justice for his murdered child. Even though it was a terrible decision, as a parent, how far is too far when it comes to avenging the death of your child? Could you sleep at night knowing the man who took them from you was still roaming around free among the masses? In a way, it's kind of like his mother Alicent in Season 1, how she was so upset over the loss of her son's eye that she was willing to openly defy the king and attack the heir to the Iron Throne, all for the chance to get at the heir's child and get revenge for her son. It's a cruel act, an evil act to pursue and try to harm a child in such a way, but on the one hand, this is a bereaved mother searching for some kind of justice for a wrong done to her child. So there are layers of complexity, even with a decision that seems as senseless as this one. Now, Aegon is ridiculed for this in an amazing scene between him and Otto, where his grandfather lets him know that he's a fool. But Aegon still thinks it was justice because he got the guy who killed his son. The ends justify the means. And I want to say, I feel like this kind of reflects what happens with Rhaenyra in the Red Sowing as well. In the same way Aegon sacrifices innocence for the sake of killing his son's killer, Rhaenyra also sacrifices innocence, but it's okay because she got 2 new dragon riders. I just thought it was an interesting way to parallel the characters. Since they both have different yet similar, it was for the greater good moments. But aside from that, I find the dismissal of Otto as Hand of the King in this situation to be a very interesting scene for Aegon. I mean, his grandfather lets him have it. He calls him a fool, says Viserys was right about him, and that he was the one who really made Aegon king. He challenges Aegon's newfound belief that Viserys might have actually loved him. He might have actually chosen him. And Aegon dismissing Otto is definitely a response to that. He's lashing out in anger. But in another way, it's also him trying to take control. Aegon has been used as a tool for the whole of his life, mainly because his grandfather wanted him to be on the Iron Throne. for no other reason than that he was a male. So it's poetic that the one who gave him power takes it away from him. It's illogical and a really poor decision to get rid of your political muscle like this, but in a way, for Aegon, this could be seen as him taking control of his own life again. For once, he will be the one that is dominant. But even after the rush of denying his grandfather who manipulated him and killing so many people, Aegon still breaks down and grieves, because no matter what he does, no matter what death he deals, it won't bring his son back. You feel bad for him, and it's worse when his own mother doesn't even try to comfort him. But even after that, the dismissal of Otto, the death of his son, things still find ways to get worse for Aegon. He hits rock bottom, and then the floor suddenly falls out from under him, and he finds out that he has so much farther to fall. Despite having lost so much, despite being king, no one really respects Aegon or takes him seriously. His ideas are overlooked and challenged. He's overshadowed by his little brother, who at first glance seems like a better fit to lead. Aemond put in the work. So why didn't Aegon? Well, that's pretty obvious, because he wasn't prepared. Aside from his coronation being literally last minute, while sure people wanted him to be king and pushed him towards the Iron Throne, no one actually taught him what being a king meant, what comes with being a ruler and caring for the realm. Even as king, Aegon is still told and shown that he isn't good enough, despite this pretty much being the purpose for him being alive. And that's because no one actually believed in Aegon as an individual, as a person. They believed in the idea of King Aegon, the firstborn son of the king, someone that could be influenced and ruled through. But surprise, surprise, he's a living, breathing person with his own ideas and feelings. Aegon tries to be a good king. He tries to be proactive, but he's beaten down by everyone, even his own mother, who says he has no value. And I feel like this is what makes Aegon's character so compelling, even after he does the dumb thing and flies to Rook's Rest and gets burned and pretty much becomes irrelevant for the rest of the season. It's how easy it is, at least for me, to get invested in his story. Because Aegon is a character who takes blow after blow after blow after blow after blow, and he still keeps pushing. Everyone tends to like an underdog story, and Aegon is an underdog, despite the show portraying him as one of the bad guys in the first season. It's the repeated tragedy of his character that makes it easy to invest in him. The abuse, the neglect, the loss of his child, the presumed death of his dragon, who was pretty much his best friend, the loss of his body and the capability to produce more children. What makes it worse and even easier to sympathize with him is the idea that this could have all been avoided as well. Maybe if his parents were better to him. Maybe if the people around him actually saw him as a person and not a tool and respected him. Maybe if his mother embraced him before he flew off to the fight instead of admonishing him, this could have all been avoided. He goes through it. The odds are stacked against him. And yet, he endures. And you want to see where his story goes. You want to see how it'll end. The progression of Aegon's character throughout Season 2, the descent into madness, the slow loss of everything he has, is so compelling to me. He's a character you can sympathize with. He's a character you could even root for. Aegon actually feels and reads like a person in comparison to a lot of these other characters who are really just driven by the plot in this season. Though I will take a detour here and say something I think undercuts a lot of that sympathy and the ability to support Aegon is the assault of Diana. And this gets brought up a lot when it comes to conversations about Aegon's character. Now, despite what I said earlier in the video, that being a bad person does not make them a bad character, I'm going to be completely honest and transparent here. This may be a bit of a hot take, but that whole thing with Diana serves no narrative purpose when it comes to Aegon. And when I say something doesn't serve a narrative purpose, I mean it could be removed from the story entirely and it would function the same without them. Diana is not a character in Fire and Blood, and to be honest, I do believe that she was just shoehorned into the show to make Aegon into a villain and as unlikable as possible. Now, I am not saying that Aegon is a saint or a hero, and that sexual violence is not within his character to do, because it very well could be. In Fire and Blood, it is said that Aegon was known for grabbing at serving girls, and one narrator in the book says that he even got caught doing things with a child. But you should take that narration with a grain of salt, because the person who said that was a guy called Mushroom, and he is arguably the most unreliable narrator in the books. He was Rhaenyra's fool, and half of the stuff that he talks about, he wasn't even there for. But I digress. The issue isn't that they made Aegon a rapist, it's that they make him one and then they do nothing with it and try to tell conflicting stories. Is he a sadistic villain who abuses women, or is he an ignorant, arrogant, incompetent ruler who in his own way is trying his best? Sure, Diana was brought back in Season 2, and I don't know what they have planned for Seasons 3 and 4, but going with what we know right now, can you genuinely tell me what purpose this character serves except to be a reminder to the general audience that Aegon is a bad guy? But even then, that idea is funny because if we're being honest, a lot of the casual viewers of the show won't even remember who she is, and she does not make an impression. Aegon doesn't remember or acknowledge her, and she tends to float around like an extra. It feels like any character could reasonably take her place, and nothing in this story would change. Yet, they keep showing her because her only significance is to be Aegon's victim and to remind you how evil he is every time you begin to feel sympathy or want to potentially root for him. And this goes back to what I said earlier about Aegon being a good character this season may have been unintentional, because clearly they want you to root against him. Why else keep bringing back this character with no other real significance? Because sexual violence is often where we tend to draw the line more as an audience. And my issue isn't that she's around, it's that they introduce this aspect and reminder of Aegon's character solely for the purpose of deterring you from him. They're contradicting themselves. They give you a more morally ambiguous Aegon in Season 2, then remind you, hey, in Season 1, this guy is the villain, so you can't feel too bad. So what's the point of all that other stuff you showed me? This is what I need to be focusing on. Diana seems to serve as a petty reminder that we should not like Aegon, so we don't get too comfortable with his character, while not adding anything narratively. I feel like if they were gonna go this route, if they want us to see Aegon as a villain so badly, since you keep putting this woman in front of us, then you need to do something with her. You need to commit to a story instead of kind of flip-flopping a bit. They made this big deal of Diana being in league with Rhaenyra's handmaiden Alinda Massey when she went to the city on a scheme for Massaria. This would have been a great time to give Diana some kind of narrative influence and importance that could have affected Aegon and how the audience sees him. What if instead of just slandering Aemond, which felt like something that anyone could have done, not just her, she slandered Aegon and recounted her story about what he did to her? And maybe that becomes the start of discourse within the city. You get consequences for Aegon's actions, and this might invoke more investment from the audience towards that cooler aspect of Aegon's character and help him be seen in that darker light as she recounts the trauma of the event. But as I said earlier, she just seems to be thrown in to stop people from liking Aegon as much during Season 2, when in reality, you could remove her, and it really wouldn't be that significant or important to the story and where Aegon ends up as a character by the end of Season 2. If they wanted to go the villainous route, they should have committed instead of trying to tell us two different things at the same time. But aside from my little rant here at the end, I do genuinely believe that Aegon is one of the better characters to come out of Season 2, and I'm looking forward to seeing where his story goes on screen next season. You guys let me know what you think in the comments though. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.